So nowadays we see drivers all the time now with adjustability through the neck sleeve. We've got adjustability in the weights, in the head. Loads of options to try and dial in the right loft, delivery, shot shape. And we've even seen adjustability creep into putters with adjustability on length of shaft, also different weights in the heads. And who even remembers the TaylorMade TP wedge, which had a removable face? 2 screws in the back, replace the face, have some fresh screws. It didn't last long though, did it? And while we're on the subject of wedges, we see tons of options now, don't we? Bounce angles, grinds, the skews available. So for example, we'll take a look at Titleist SM9s, huge in the wedge department, don't they? They offer huge skews. So all those loft options, head finishes, we've got different bounces, we've got different grinds. The options are endless, and it can be very, very confusing for you as a consumer. What is the right bounce? What is the right grind for you as a golfer? Just not quite enough beans on that. So on the subject of bounce angle on the wedge, we look at bounces to take into account maybe our delivery at the club. So if we are a little bit steeper onto the golf ball, typically we need a little bit more bounce. If you're a little bit more shallower, maybe a scooper of the golf ball, you'd probably prefer to have less bounce. And then what else dictates what bounce we have? We then look at the types of golf courses we play in, the ground conditions. So if you play on a links golf course, tight bare lies faced with, you probably want a little bit less bounce. We see that on the Open, don't we? Where the pros switch out maybe the normal wedges and put wedges in with a low bounce, and grinds where they've grounded off the back edge of the sole to really get that leading edge more hugging to the ground for those bare lies. Boom, that's nice. So the other option then is playing in some, maybe a parkland golf course where the ground's a lot softer, there's a lot more grass there. So potentially then you're going to move into a club with more bounce. Putter's feeling quite good today for a change. But then of course we want to go and play different golf courses. We might go and play that links one week, the next weekend we're going to play a parkland. So realistically you're not going to have maybe 3 sets of wedges in your bag that are to choose from with different bounces depending on the course you're going to be playing. So what if I said there was a wedge you could buy that you could change the bounce angle on your club for every single situation you will get faced with on the golf course? That would probably sound pretty cool, wouldn't it? So introducing the Alcor Tour wedge from Vega. It comes with some different soles. You've got a low, a mid and a high bounce sole. 2 screws, unscrew, replace. You can choose the bounce and the sole, the preference to your delivery, the golf course you're playing, maybe even the time of the year and the ground conditions. So before we delve into the technology in this particular wedge from Vega, I want to talk a little bit about bounce and maybe get you to understand what bounce is. Many of us don't understand really exactly what the bounce is trying to do or what it actually is. So bounce is basically where that trail sole of the club, that back edge of the sole is lower than that leading edge. We have an angle there. Typically we see that on wedges what will be sort of anywhere from maybe some 8 to typically 12, maybe sometimes even 14 degrees depending on the loft. So that's the angle of the bounce. So the higher that number, the more bounce you've got, the lower that back edge is in relation to that front edge. So when that club sits on the ground, we'll see that leading edge, when your club has more bounce, the leading edge will sit more up away from the ground. So you can appreciate you're hitting off a very, very tight lie. If you've got a lot of bounce, that leading edge is going to be really sat up, maybe even opening up a few thin shots. And the lower that bounce number, the more that leading edge hugs and sits a lot closer to that ground. So typically suited for the golfer who plays on those tight bare lies. So as we mentioned before, bounce can also marry up to your angle of attack into that golf ball. So you're for what we call a little bit of a digger of the ball, maybe some big interaction with that ground, very steep, some big divots, maybe a little bit sort of jabby on the shots, then you'll be better with something with more bounce to try and get that club to come back out of that ground so it's not digging too much. And vice versa, you might be the type of golfer who's a little bit of a scooper. You might get a little bit wristy through the shot. So you can appreciate you're going to deliver that leading edge a little bit higher from the ground. So you want something with a little bit more of a lower bounce there to get that leading edge a bit closer to the ground. So if you're a little bit of a scoop of the ball, you're probably going to come in a lot more shallower and maybe not take any divots on the ground. So again, that lower bounce will be a little bit more suited to you. And of course, if you're somewhere in the middle, then you've always got that mid bounce option to choose from. So let's quickly just run through the technology involved in this Vega wedge, apart from just the changeability of the soles. So we've got a Japanese forged head for that fantastic feel. We've got some grooves in the back of the golf club there, which are basically taking some weight out of that heel section, obviously allowing that to replace in that sort of bulky bit in the toe. So moving more weight in the toe allows the club face to square a little bit easier for more accurate shots. Also, the weight coming up the head, as we know, when we see this with many other wedges as well, pulls the centre of gravity higher. We strike lower than that CG spot. That promotes a little bit of a lower flight with a more spin, more control. And then obviously we can't talk about wedges without talking about grooves, can we? Surface roughness, trying to get some grip. So Vega have got some what they call reverse CNC milling on the face. Again, trying to get that ultimate grip on that golf ball, ultimate spin and that control. And we're going to talk about these soles, haven't we? So it's a super light titanium sole, which is changeable. So with it being a much lighter, again, they can shift that CG up in that club face for creating more spin. Okay, so let's mix up some soles now. Different lies, let's see how these soles react. So I'm going to start off with the high bounce. So I'm playing at Bentham Golf Club here, so it's a parkland golf course. We're not going to get many really tight knitted lies here. We've got a little bit of a softer ground condition. It's a beautiful lie, to be honest, but maybe favouring that sort of slightly higher bounce option. Again, as we mentioned, you've got to mix this into your delivery. If you're a little bit shallower, then maybe you want to drop down a little bit in this bounce. But I'm going to try this higher bounce here. So as we say, that back edge now sits much lower than that leading edge. So we can get this club to sort of hit the ground and let the club sort of come back out of the ground a little bit. So if you've got a little bit more give underneath it, the higher bounce might be a good option. And that was a really nice shot, and that's a great example. I got a bit too much into the ground there, but I could really feel that sole exit the club back out of that ground then. It didn't keep digging, and that's probably what would have happened if I had less bounce there. That sharp edge would dig more. So switching now out into the low bounce, and this is now 8 degrees. The high bounce is 12, the mid bounce is 10, the low bounce is 8. So 8 degrees bounce, we know now this trail edge is a little bit higher and it's a little bit more in line with that leading edge. So the leading edge basis sits a little bit lower. This is a great example of when a low bounce would really probably come into its own. We see, as I say, the Open Championship, the Links Golf Course, those guys will be switching out their general week in, week out wedges and place them with a lower bounce to get those tight lies and the strikes correct. So I've got a little bit of a bare patchy lie here. There's not many of these around here at Bentham because it's in beautiful condition, but sometimes you see this a lot on those links golf courses. So as I present that wedge now behind that golf ball, I don't want that leading edge to be sat off the ground with that high bounce. That's going to scare me. That's going to feel like I'm just going to blade this through the back of the green. So I've got the low bounce now, and then straight away here now, this leading edge sits much lower. It feels like I can get underneath the ball, even on this really tight lie. Let's give this one a go. Oh, it's come off with a really nice bit of spin. Little bit of ground interaction, but I didn't get all that bounce jumping that club out, and I've played a really nice little shot there. So we're going to talk about the price of these wedges, and they are going to come in at the top end. So you can actually buy these wedges just with the low, just with the mid, or just with the bounce. So basically the non-adjustable option. Same head, but just non-adjustable. They're going to come in at £269 per wedge. So if you're throwing 3 wedges in there, it's going to rack up a little bit of price. Now, if you opt for what I've got here with the kit and the 3 different soles that come with it, and you can interchange, you're going to pay an extra £80 on top of the 260. So that's obviously going to take that up to £349 per wedge. So if you're going to be throwing 3 wedges in there, you're over £1,000 for a set of 3 wedges. Getting a little bit pricey. I think that's just going to take it a little bit out of the market for many golfers. As much as the quality is there with that Japanese forging, I love the concept of having different bounce options depending on where you play. Just that price point, over £1,000 for 3 wedges, it's a bit punchy for my liking.